Midjourney has come a long way in the last year or so. It's broken out of its Discord server, got its own app, and upgraded to version 7. It's also recently released video too, along with being widely considered the best AI image generator available. Whether you're a hobbyist doodler, a concept artist, or just someone who likes the idea of conjuring up wild images from a few words, Midjourney has been at the forefront of AI image generation for a good few years. In this video, we'll walk you through how to get started with the latest version of Midjourney, and more importantly, how to get the most out of it. From prompting tips and reference tools to secret parameters and stylistic tweaks, this is everything you need to coax carefully tailored results out of this increasingly impressive platform. We'll be covering the image features only, not the new video features. We'll get into those in another video. But before we dive into prompts and parameters, let's take a minute to get our bearings. What exactly is Midjourney? In short, it's an AI image and video generator, one of the most powerful around, and with the release of version 7, it's better and more accessible than ever. If you've ever been on the fence about trying it out, now's a pretty great time to get stuck in. Of course, it's not the only image generator making waves right now. If you've been anywhere near the internet lately, you'll have seen the sudden explosion of Studio Ghibli-style images. Those came from ChatGPT's much-hyped 4.0 model, which now includes its own image generation. It's pretty slick, and for some quick visual noodling, it's pretty capable. But does that make Midjourney redundant? I don't think so. In fact, I'd argue that Midjourney remains the most creatively satisfying tool out there for generating visuals. Its depth, flexibility, and ability to produce genuinely stunning results still put it a cut above. Now, before you jump in, it's worth quickly considering the subscription options. Midjourney isn't free. You'll need a paid plan to generate images. There are a few tiers, but for most casual users, the basic or standard plan should be plenty. If you're planning on generating a lot of images, or you want access to features like stealth mode for private generations, you might want to stump up for Pro. Prices aren't outrageous, but you'll want to consider what the right plan for your needs is. The good news is you don't need to mess around with Discord anymore. Everything we're covering in this video can be done right in the browser version of Midjourney, which is much more user-friendly and makes the whole experience a lot more accessible. Let's take a quick look around the homepage. First choice, light or dark mode. Personally, I prefer dark mode, easier on the eyes, but it's entirely up to you. You'll see that the landing screen shows a feed of public images. This is the Explore page, where you can browse other people's creations for inspiration. Over on the left is your navigation menu. Explore, create, edit, personalize, organize, and so on. We'll go over the important ones as we go. One last thing before we dive in. If you want to access version 7, you'll need to unlock it by participating in Midjourney's personalization system. That means ranking 200 pairs of images to help train the model on your preferences. It doesn't take too long, and it's absolutely worth doing if you want the full V7 experience. Okay, so let's jump in and start prompting. We'll start basic. It's always a good idea when familiarizing yourself with a new tool, and give Midjourney a super simple prompt. So, off the top of my head, how about a gibbon? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what a gibbon looks like, just that it's some sort of monkey. And yes, gibbon is an enjoyable word to say. And there you have it. That's what a gibbon looks like, if Midjourney's to be believed at least. So we have our gibbon. In fact, we have 4 gibbons. For every prompt, Midjourney generates 4 images, giving you a range to choose from. This is great because it allows you to hone in on the stylistic elements you like the most, and should you wish, continue to refine that image until you've got something you're totally happy with. One quick way to do this is available as an option right here on the Create screen. I can hover over the gibbon of my choice, I like the look of this guy, and choose either very subtle or very strong. These will generate 4 variations of the chosen image. There's also a new Animate button that effectively turns your image into 4 short video generations. As I say, we'll focus on Midjourney's rather exciting new video offering in another video. So right now, we'll limit ourselves to these 2 variation options. Hit Subtle for 4 images with very minor variations. This is a good option if you're pretty happy with the image as it is and just want to have a few more to choose from, or strong for more pronounced variations that are more likely to take the image in a different direction. Very strong can also be a good way of getting Midjourney to correct imperfections in an otherwise favoured image. Say you've generated a splendid gibbon, but he's got a dodgy, unnatural looking hand. At least one of the variations should solve the problem. So let's go back to the original prompt, which is all a bit simple. And let's add a bit more to the prompt and put our gibbon in a scene of some sort. How about a gibbon in a swimming pool, wearing inflatable armbands? I don't know how adept gibbons are at swimming, but I guess this chap isn't confident in the pool just yet. But hang on a minute, before we go ahead and generate a new set of images, it occurs to me I'm not ready to say goodbye to our new primate pal. Luckily, there is a way he can live on in our new images. There are a couple of ways we can approach this. Firstly, we can use our favourite gibbon as an image prompt. The easiest way to do this is to find the creation actions down here in the bottom right of the image screen. There are 3 options to use the image, including Image. Select that and you'll see that our gibbon is added as an image prompt. This means that whatever we generate now will use our chosen image as a reference. So we should get some continuity between the original image and our new generations. Now we have our gibbon as an image reference, we can combine that with a text prompt. So let's type in a gibbon in a swimming pool wearing inflatable armbands and see what we get. And there we have it. That looks a lot like our gibbon chilling out in the pool. If we hadn't used the image prompt, we'd have a gibbon in the pool, but we wouldn't have this continuity. So that worked pretty well, but we can go further in our efforts to reference the original gibbon. Midjourney has had a feature called character reference for a while. Essentially, this is like an image prompt, but it centers on characters. So in theory, it allows you to maintain character continuity and likeness from image to image. This could be useful if you were creating a comic and wanted to ensure that the same recognizable character appeared from image to image. In Midjourney V7, character reference has been replaced by Omni Reference, which does pretty much the same thing, but can be applied to any object, not just characters. So you can select a Midjourney image or upload your own image and add it to an Omni Reference prompt. This can be done more or less in the same way as the image prompt I just showed you. So let's go back to our favourite gibbon and use him as an image again. But this time we'll drag him over to the Omni Reference box, then repeat the same text prompt. In theory, the AI should be extra focused on maintaining a likeness of our gibbon. And sure enough, I think that's a pretty great likeness. Having said that, I must admit that my untrained eye isn't great at telling the difference between gibbons. I wasn't even sure what a gibbon looks like 5 minutes ago. So perhaps now's the time to leave our gibbon friend splashing about in the pool and switch to an ape I'm more comfortable with identifying. Me. I'd like to think we're moving a rung or two up the evolutionary ladder, but some may disagree. This time we'll hit the Add Images button in the Imagine bar, which allows us to choose a file or drop it into our image library. We can then drag my grinning visage into the Omni Reference box and add it to our next prompt. I think we'll leave the pool and go for something a bit more fantastical this time. I'm a cat lover, so how about man in a magical fantasy world of cats? And here I am, surrounded by cats. I'd say the likeness is variable, to be honest. But there's certainly enough here to work with. Remember, we can run through subtle and strong variations, and of course, we can tweak the prompt. Which is actually a worthwhile point to touch on. It's useful to consider emphasis when you're writing your prompt. You can do this by mentioning something you want to be more prominent at the start of the prompt. In this case, a man, me, is the start of the text. If we rewrite the prompt so it's just a fantasy world of cats with the same Omni Reference image prompt, you'll find that I'm less prominent. And you know what? These cats remind me of Louis Wayne's cat illustrations, which, as it happens, I'm rather fond of. Which presents me with a serendipitous opportunity to show you another image reference function, Style Reference. If you have a particular style you'd like Midjourney to emulate, then this is a great way to prompt. It won't copy objects, but rather incorporate a stylistic vibe. In this case, I'm wondering what might emerge if I deliberately incorporate Louis Wayne into the prompt. One way to do this would be to write it into the text prompt, a fantasy world of cats in the style of Louis Wayne, say. But that relies on the AI understanding the reference. Instead, we can give Midjourney an example to work with. So I have an example of a Louis Wayne illustration that I can drag into my library, then drag into the style reference box, next door to my selfie in the Omni Reference box. These will both now be integrated into my next prompt. For the text component, I'll try to ensure that my character is also part of the image, rather than superimposed over the illustration, by writing illustration of a man in a magical world of cats. This should incorporate me into the same aesthetic as the cats, and the whole thing should be influenced by the Louis Wayne style reference. Another thing we can do to ensure that the overall style is prioritized ahead of my likeness is to dial down the Omni strength a bit. You can do that with this slider in the Omni Reference bar. Feel free to have a play with this, but be aware that ramping it up really high can produce weird images. The result is pretty cool. You can see that the style reference has had an influence, and this time my character is more integrated into the scene. It's also worth mentioning that you can include multiple style references in your prompt. So let's say I want to bump up the psychedelic quality of this already quite surreal image. I can add a second style reference, in this case a psychedelic record cover from the 60s, and you can see that the AI has added it to the mix and we have some suitably trippy images. Okay, I think it's fair to say that this is quite stylistically extreme. What if you want to prioritise a more stripped back aesthetic? Well, Midjourney has the perfect antidote: RAW mode. RAW mode is all about control. If you want Midjourney to focus on your prompt and refrain from adding beautification, which it tends to do otherwise, then this is a useful function. It's an effective way to damp down Midjourney's artistic instincts. If we input a bowl of fruit as a text prompt, we get some rather attractive but obviously stylized images of a bowl of fruit. But if we enter the same prompt and select RAW mode in the settings, you'll find we get more photographically straightforward bowls of fruit. This is because RAW mode cuts out the aesthetic inclinations of whichever Midjourney model you're using, and, as the kids say, raw dogs it. Anyway, I definitely recommend it if you're trying to achieve photorealistic results. While we're looking at the settings, we should quickly cover a few more parameters you can play with. Image size is pretty self-explanatory. You've got three basic image shapes to choose from: portrait, which is 3:4 aspect ratio, square, which is a square, and landscape, which is 4:3. But there are actually plenty of options in between. Just move the slider up and down and you can set pretty much any aspect ratio between 1:2 and 2:1. There are a few more sliders to play with in settings. Stylization is essentially the opposite of RAW mode. The higher you crank it up, the more license you're giving to Midjourney to get creative. This can result in a visually exciting image, but will err further from your prompt in the process. Weirdness is also pretty self-explanatory. The higher the weirdness value, the weirder the image is likely to be. Now, obviously, weird is quite a vague and subjective word, but I guess it essentially implies that the results will be quirkier and more unpredictable. So if you're up for a set of surprising generations, crank up the weird and see what you get. Midjourney's own guide describes the weird parameter as experimental, and it's set to 0 as a default. I can't say I find myself using it much, because I'm typically trying to have more control over the results rather than ramp up the random factor. But it's fun to play with. The third aesthetic slider is variety. This parameter influences the degree of variety between the set of images you generate. So with this set to 0, which is the default, the 4 generations will probably look pretty stylistically similar. If you ramp it up, you'll get 4 quite different responses to the same prompt. I guess this can be useful if you're not sure what style you're aiming for and want to generate a set of images that presents a broad aesthetic range. It's worth pointing out that the variation parameter is also referred to, rather more dramatically, as chaos. In fact, if you want to set the variation weighting in your text prompt rather than with the slider in settings, it's represented by a C for chaos. So you would type your prompt followed by C and a value between 0 and 100. This approach can be used with all of the parameters if you'd rather set them in your text prompt. So for instance, if you want to set the Stylize parameter to 100, you could add --s 100 to the end of your prompt. I think to some extent this is a legacy of Midjourney's roots on Discord, and I tend to use the slider controls where possible these days. but there are still plenty of parameters that can only be deployed with a command in the text prompt. So this seems like a good juncture to look at some of them. Let's start with a parameter that gives you an extra degree of control over your generations. Seed. Every time you prompt Midjourney, the AI starts with a kind of invisible blueprint called a seed. If you run the same prompt twice, you'll often get very different results because each generation is working from a different randomized seed. But if you add a specific seed value to your prompt by typing -- seed followed by a number, you're locking in that blueprint. This means if you rerun the prompt with the same seed, you'll get the same image, or at least extremely close. This is super handy if you want to test how a small change in wording affects the outcome. So you could run a medieval knight, seed 42, and then try a blue medieval knight, seed 42, and the only real difference should be the addition of blue. It gives you a kind of A/B testing method for prompt tweaks. You can also combine seed with permutations, curly bracket variations inside a prompt, for a controlled side-by-side test of, say, different colours or moods. Really helpful if you're trying to isolate the effect of specific words on the output. Now, if seed gives you more consistency, the stop parameter does the opposite. It cuts things off early. By adding -- stop, followed by a number between 10 and 100, you're telling Midjourney when to halt the generation process. The closer to 100, the more finished the image will be. A stop value of 100 is normal, 90 will give you something still fairly polished, 50 might feel sketch-like and ethereal, and 10, well, you'll probably get a faint, foggy mess. But that can be interesting in its own right. So why would you want to stop the generation early? Well, sometimes the earlier stages have a raw, painterly quality that you lose when Midjourney over-optimizes. Stop is a good way of catching that moment before it gets too polished or stylized. This is great if you're looking for something more abstract or impressionistic. Next up, a parameter that sounds aggressive, but is surprisingly useful. No. By adding -- no followed by a word or phrase, you're telling Midjourney what not to include. So if you're making a scenic coastal village, but don't want any people cluttering up the scene, you can add -- no people. This is also a good workaround if Midjourney keeps interpreting your prompt too literally. Say you want a dragon in a cave, but you keep getting torches or fire in the image and don't want that. Try -- no fire. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it does give you a nudge in the right direction when you want to steer clear of certain elements. Now for something that might surprise you. Repeat. Adding -- repeat followed by a number lets you automatically generate the same prompt multiple times in one go. So repeat 4 will run your prompt 4 times, each with different seeds, and produce 4 sets of 4 images. That's 16 images, all from the same idea, but each with a different underlying structure. It's a great time saver if you want to explore multiple interpretations of the same prompt without having to keep manually re-entering it. Just be aware this will burn through your GPU minutes quickly, especially on the Pro plan, so keep your eye on your usage. Next, we come to tile, a parameter that does exactly what it sounds like. If you're designing patterns, backgrounds, or repeatable textures, think like wallpapers, wrapping paper, or game textures, this can be really useful. Just add -- tile to your prompt, and Midjourney will generate an image designed to seamlessly repeat on all sides. It can work with all kinds of styles, like abstract patterns, floral designs, or geometric shapes, and it's surprisingly good at creating smooth transitions between edges. You can even combine it with style references if you want the whole thing to follow a particular artistic influence. A quick test with psychedelic mushrooms -- tile produces a trippy, endlessly repeating texture. Try tiling it in a grid and you'll see how smooth the joins are. A really handy tool if you're working on visual assets for print or digital design. Another parameter worth mentioning is quality, or -- quality if you're adding it to your prompt manually. This one controls how much processing power Midjourney spends on your image. The default is quality 1, but you can go as low as quality 0.25 if you want faster generations, at the cost of image detail. It's particularly useful for rough ideation or quickly working through early concepts where you don't need high fidelity yet. On the flip side, if you really want to squeeze more detail out of a generation, you can crank it up to quality 2, and this uses up double the GPU minutes, so weigh that trade-off carefully. If you're happy with a particular image but want to explore alternate directions, the Remix feature is your friend. Remix allows you to tweak a prompt while maintaining elements of the original image. You'll find it among the Creation Actions options. Just click Remix Strong and Midjourney will reload the prompt box so you can adjust your text before generating a new set of images. This is especially useful when you love the style of an image but want to change the subject. For instance, if you've got a cyberpunk samurai and want to turn them into a cyberpunk knight, Remix makes it easy to preserve that gritty neon aesthetic while swapping out the character. Combine it with parameters like seed or style reference and you've got a really powerful iterative workflow. Once you've landed on something you like, it's time to upscale. This is how you go from a thumbnail sized preview to a full resolution image that's suitable for sharing, printing or further editing. You'll see two options under Creation Actions, Subtle and Creative Upscale. Subtle preserves the original as closely as possible, while Creative may reinterpret some details for added flair. Generally speaking, Subtle is your go-to if you already love the image. Creative can be fun to experiment with, especially if you're open to surprise enhancements. You'll find both options directly under the image, and they don't cost any more to run, so feel free to try both and pick your favourite. At this point, we've covered most of the parameters that you can use to influence Midjourney before it generates a set of images. But there's also a way you can transform your generations in post, the Midjourney Editor. This gives you the ability to in-paint, edit within the image, and you can outpaint by expanding the canvas. You can even retexture an image using a new visual style. You can erase parts of the image, say a weird looking hand or an unnervingly freaky cat, and you can regenerate that bit of the image based on the existing context. You can also completely change the look of an image using retexture. Just drop in a new style reference and Midjourney will keep the composition while transforming the aesthetic. Beyond editing, there's personalisation, which is Midjourney's way of tailoring the AI to your aesthetic tastes. Personalisation begins by ranking 200 image pairs, a process that helps Midjourney learn what you like. This unlocks global profiles, and from there you can create mood boards to guide future generations. Mood boards act like a persistent style reference. They give your prompts a consistent visual direction, which is ideal if you're working on a theme project or just want a recognisable signature look. Combine a mood board with Stylize, Chaos or Raw mode and you can produce remarkably consistent, original imagery with relatively little effort. Finally, it's worth mentioning two newer modes that can dramatically speed things up: Draft mode and Conversational mode. Draft mode generates rougher, faster images that render in about half the time and use fewer GPU minutes, ideal for concept development or trying out loads of ideas quickly. You can enable this via the settings or by using --mode draft in your prompt. Another newish addition is Conversational mode, which is designed to mimic more of a back and forth workflow. Instead of treating each prompt like a clean slate, Midjourney will try to remember the context of previous prompts to guide future ones. It's still evolving, but it's an exciting development if you like a more fluid, iterative, creative process, a bit like ChatGPT. And that's a wrap. We've covered the core Midjourney workflow from basic prompts and reference images to more advanced parameters and editing tools. Whether you're chasing photorealism, building a surreal world of cat deities, or just curious to see what a gibbon learning to swim might look like, Midjourney gives you loads of flexibility to experiment, iterate and fine-tune. Version 7 makes that easier and more accessible than ever before. So if you're new here, or if you've dipped a toe in but haven't explored all the features, now's the perfect time to dive deeper. Thanks for watching and happy prompting. See you next time. It'll be absolutely agentic.